What we're seeing in Russia, which is very close to us, can't see it from your house, but
it's pretty close.
It's close. About 2 miles separate Alaska from.
Is that right? 2 miles?
Yeah, 2 miles.
Really?
Yeah, especially in the very northwest corner there.
Yeah.
Welcome to Canusa Street, a podcast at the intersection of the issues and policies between Canada and the United States. Here are your hosts, Scotty Greenwood and Chris Sands.
Welcome back to Canusa Street, everybody. I'm Scotty Greenwood with the Canadian American Business Council, and I'm here in our pop-up studio live with Chris Sands in Calgary, Alberta. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Scotty. Nice to be back with you on Canusa Street.
You too. And this is getting fun. I think we should do this in person as much as we can. I'm excited about our very distinguished special guest. The Lieutenant Governor of Alaska is somebody that is well known in Alaska, not only because everybody knows everybody, but you have a very great record. But also is talking about the Arctic here at the PNWER Conference, the Pacific Northwest Economic Region Conference. And I think the Arctic is a subject, I know the Arctic is a subject I care a lot about, but I think it's important to the world, and maybe we'll get into some of those issues today. So first, Chris, how about you properly introduce our distinguished guest?
It's a pleasure. Lieutenant Governor Kevin Meyer he's the sitting Lieutenant Governor and was first elected to the position in 2018. Prior to his time as Lieutenant Governor, he served 8 years in the Anchorage Assembly, 8 years in the State House of Representatives, and 10 years in the Alaska State Senate. He served in several key leadership positions in the legislature, including co-chair of the House and Senate Finance Committees, also Senate Majority Leader, Senate Rules Chairman, and was chosen by his Senate colleagues to serve as Senate President from 2015 to 2016. As Lieutenant Governor, he's been selected to numerous boards and committees. He is very active on Arctic issues and has really put Alaska, you were already on the map, but very much at the center of American thinking about the Arctic. And so we're really glad that you were able to come and join us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. Yeah,
yep, absolutely.
Great.
Absolutely. So, you know, it's an interesting thing. In Canada, when they talk about the Arctic, it is a Canadian issue. In the United States, when we talk about the Arctic, it's an Alaska issue.
Yeah.
Talk to us about what are the big challenges and opportunities presented by the Arctic for our country, not just for Alaska, but for the United States.
Yeah, well, you know, I think for the longest time, the United States didn't realize that they are an Arctic country because of us. And now recently, you know, they are recognizing the importance of the whole Arctic region and for Alaska. What we're seeing in Russia, which is very close to us, you can't see it from your house, but
it's pretty close.
It's close. About 2 miles separates Alaska from.
Is that right? 2 miles?
Yeah, 2 miles.
Really?
Yeah, especially in the very northwest corner there.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and what we're seeing in Russia is that they are really expanding their offshore oil and gas platforms and development, and with that, they've increased their military presence. Now, what they tell us is that they're doing that to protect their oil and gas investments, but we're not sure, especially after Ukraine.
Yeah.
And you know, and even some of their government officials had said, well, you know, why don't we take back Alaska as well as Ukraine? So
they've said that, really?
They have said that, yes.
No kidding.
Yes. And you know, that's sort of concerning, but not too much because, you know, we've been part of the United States since the 1870s, which was called the Seward's Folly, which actually was a very good investment. It was only $8 million back then. And so what we've done because of that is we've also built up our military now in Alaska. We have 8 very large military bases, and just about everybody in Alaska has 2 or 3 guns, you know, because we go hiking, you need a shotgun for the bears.
Sure, absolutely.
You know, you got to shoot the moose and the caribou with your rifle, and then a handgun for protection. So, you know, if Russia does want to come back and reclaim Alaska,
good luck to them.
Yeah, we're ready.
Yeah, exactly.
But so what we're seeing is you know, a lot of discussion during this symposium conference about critical minerals, the U.S. Geological Survey had said that at least 30 of the 35 critical minerals are in Alaska. So we have them. We want to produce them. We're producing some up at Red Dog Mine at Kotzebue with Teck. We have 12 native corporations that their whole intent is to produce their land for their people. And so they hire the indigenous people. That's their top priority, and that's what we're seeing at Red Dog, at the zinc and copper mine up there. And then up on the North Slope where the oil and gas is, they are pretty much doing most of the production for the oil companies. So there's just a lot of opportunity in Alaska, and now with the receding of the ice because of climate change, we have a lot more tourism coming up, a lot more cruise ships coming up, but that also brings risk, because what we're seeing now is China in particular taking advantage of that to, for export purposes. And I already mentioned what Russia is doing. And so that is concerning to us. It's concerning to us that if there was an environmental disaster, an oil spill, we're not prepared for it. We couldn't clean it up, and Russia certainly can. It would require an icebreaker more than likely, because there's still a lot of ice up there. And the nearest icebreaker is in Seattle.
Wow.
So, which
is pretty far away if you look at a map.
It would take several days. To get up to Nome, where the disaster would likely happen. Now, the good news, though, with the infrastructure bill that just passed, they are building new ice cutters, and we've been told that one of them will come to Alaska. Also, there's several, I think it's like over $600 million going to a new deepwater port in Nome as well. And that's more likely where the ice cutter would be housed. Also, though, in that infrastructure bill, which was great for Alaska, is $1.5 billion for broadband, and
that's got to be important.
Yeah, it's got to be. Yeah, it's critical, because 70% of our land is not accessible by road. So the only way to get there is by plane. Still some use dog sleds, mostly three-wheelers though now. Yeah, mechanical dog sleds, right?
Yeah.
But if you can't fly in and somebody needs medical attention, then the telemedical is critical. Sure. And that's where the broadband will really, really help. So this infrastructure bill is going to really help Alaska.
That's really interesting. You mentioned the Red Dog Mine, and just for our listeners, Chris, Teck Resources is a company in British Columbia that has invested in development of copper and nickel in Alaska and some other places. I do some work with Teck, and what's interesting is all the talk in Washington now is about ally shoring and near shoring, and how do we displace Russia and how do we displace China? Well, because of the investments in Alaska that Teck has made, it's a Canadian company that is the largest developer of critical minerals in here in North America, and that's a story that isn't well known. So I'm happy you raised it, Governor, because I think we'll talk about it more on Canusa Street. But Alaska is playing a key role here in the security of North America, but also in the carbon transition, because after all, these critical minerals and resources are used to build solar cells, build electric vehicle batteries, and things like that. Absolutely. And so Alaska has a key role to play, and I'm really glad you mentioned it.
Well, I just hope they let us, when I say they, the federal government, because so much of the land, unfortunately, is still owned by the federal government, over 60%.
Is that right? That's a large chunk.
Yeah, 60%, and about 20% is for the Alaska Natives, which is great, and then the rest. The rest is pretty much state land. Only 1% is in private hands. Very, very small amount.
That's interesting. That's got to be unusual, isn't it, Chris? That sounds more like Canada than the United States.
It does. I know a lot of the western states, though, are like that.
Yeah,
there's a big federal presence.
Like that too, yeah. Like I said, the native indigenous folks and the native corporations have been great about wanting to develop their land. Again, because the profits from that go to their shareholders, which are the indigenous people, and of course the state. We're very pro development. We want the jobs. We want the economic activity. But with the feds having over 60%, it's unfortunately that's where a lot of these critical minerals are. So we need to get our folks back in D.C. to say, look, we'd rather get this from Alaska than China. We'd rather get our oil and gas from Alaska than Iran or, I guess, recently Saudi Arabia. We have to get them convinced of that, and we have two good senators, Senator Sullivan and Senator Murkowski, and they do their best. But
it's an uphill battle.
It looks, especially now with the climate change and going renewable and all that. And renewable is great, and we support that, and we have a lot of renewable energy already in Alaska. And we're going in that direction ourselves, but you just can't do it overnight. And I think that's what we're finding, and Russia's taking advantage of that leverage.
Yeah. Sorry, Chris. One more, and then I'll turn it to you, and then I'll turn into a pumpkin. You also have a long border with Canada.
Yes.
How is the Canada-U.S. border from an Alaska point of view? You have to travel from the United States through Canada back into the United States. So there's some unique issues actually in terms of connectedness. How do you think about the border? How's it going?
We love Canada, and we love our neighbors, whether it be to the east. Maybe not so much to the west, but no. We have a great relationship, and our people go back and forth all the time. The tourists, drive up through the Alcan highways you mentioned, and we just heard a presentation from the premier from the Yukon, and that Skagway port that's on Alaska side is critical to them, for them to get their critical minerals out because they don't have a port. So
sorry to interrupt you. That's a beautiful place, though, Chris. Have you been to Skagway, Alaska?
I've not been to Skagway, but I know it was the heart of the old Alaska boundary dispute at the beginning of the last century. Was critical. The U.S. held the port. Canada tried to get it. The British tried to get it, and it was all about the Russian map makers who did such a lousy job of saying where the edge of that territory was.
Well, it's absolutely glorious. If you ever have a chance, I was in Yukon with the Canadian American Business Council business delegation, and we went over to Skagway, and just the drive over was spectacular. Mm-hmm. And then once you get there, anyway, we digress.
Well, I was going to ask you, Lieutenant Governor, because of the not only do not a lot of Americans from the lower 48 really connect with Alaska. We know there's an Arctic up there, but that's not our lived experience, and so we have kind of maybe fuzzy ideas about how things actually work. How is the Canadian Arctic? When you look at Yukon and Northwest Territories, because I know they're in the Pinwa region, what are some of the similarities and maybe some of the differences between the ways in which Alaska works and its neighbors work?
Well, in my conversations with both the folks in Northwest Territories and the Yukon, they're very, very similar. I mean, we don't have many people, but we have a lot of land. Mm-hmm. And we don't have many roads. We don't have much infrastructure. So a lot of ways we're very similar. There are, as you know, there's 8 countries that are considered Arctic countries. And, of course, Canada, the U.S., and Norway, Finland, Sweden, Iceland, Greenland, and Russia. And we have been, before Russia, did this thing they did in Ukraine, and they are doing, we used to get together and would talk about, how can we move the Arctic forward with the changing climate and with the more emphasis on development in this area, and it's too bad. Russia has most of the Arctic, and now they're not worth this anymore. I worry
about that a little bit. It seems, and of course we're glad if Sweden and Finland join NATO in a lot of ways, but it'll put a situation where the Arctic is divided between Russia Arctic and NATO Arctic. Do you think that, that kind of a divide, it seems like it puts a lot of burden on us to coordinate with our allies, but it also has the potential for conflict or a failure of cooperation? Yeah.
Well, that's the concern. I guess I hadn't thought of that. Well, I guess Greenland and Iceland's not part of the NATO either, I don't believe.
Well, Greenland is because it's still under Denmark. So,
okay. Well, we tried to buy them, didn't we?
We did try to buy them
under President Trump.
A couple of times. Yes, President Trump tried to buy Greenland. Well, that would have solved the problem.
Well, he realized that they have all these critical minerals, and now and of course China is very interested in them too for that reason. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, we are. It is important to think about conflict with Russia because, of course, we're in one right now. It's real. It's today. It's happening in Ukraine. Contrast that with Russia cooperation in space, where we're not in conflict. And I wonder if there is some world in which in the Arctic, it's somewhere, but it's not conflict in Europe, it's not total cooperation in space, but there's maybe a tense truce or something. But I think that would require, and you mentioned it, Governor, capability. We need, in Canada and the United States, and in our allies, we need more capability. We don't need just one icebreaker. I'm glad we're getting one. But we need 10.
Yeah.
Canada needs to be a part of that. I mean, we need all kinds of capability. We have under-the-sea capability, of course, with the U.S. Navy, but we need icebreakers. You mentioned disaster. What are we going to do if and when, God forbid, something happens that's an environmental catastrophe? We have to be able to remediate it. And we don't have any of those things yet.
No, we do not. We do not. And that is frightening, especially now as we see so much more activity in the various water passages. China, for example, is really taking advantage of that. China, not even an Arctic country, has more icebreakers than we do. So,
well, and they wanted to be an observer to the Arctic Council.
I think they are an observer. Yeah. They wanted to be a member.
They wanted to be a member.
And we go, wait a minute, you're not part of our. You're not.
Yeah.
And let me ask about that, because the Arctic Council, when it was set up, obviously Russia's chairing it now, so we're not meeting because we don't want to validate that. Although we haven't kicked them out, and I think that goes to your comment that there is a lot of value in potential cooperation, and we may get past this. But one of the sets of governments that is always left out are, I guess you call subnational jurisdictions like Alaska and the Canadian territories and so on. Can we use this opportunity while we're sort of not very happy with the Russian chairmanship to deepen the connection between some of the people who live in that region and this Arctic Council, which is really uniting federal or national governments? I mean, can't we, if we can bring in China as an observer, couldn't we bring in the Yukon as an observer and give them more role? Because you're living there. This is what you see every day should be informing the kind of opportunities for cooperation and the warnings about problems.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important, too, that we bring in more indigenous people from the Arctic areas, because they've lived here forever, right? And they've constantly have been adjusting to change and in particular climate. And what's interesting is they're finding all these dinosaur bones up in the far north slope where we have our oil. Yeah, and so I asked a professor, I says, well, how could dinosaurs survive in this minus 40, 50 degree weather that they frequently have up there? And they said, well, it never used to be that cold. So the climate's always been changing. Now, the argument, though, is now it's changing much faster. But the indigenous people, they know how to survive. And so we just need to make sure they're included in whatever discussions we have. And there is a conference coming up in Greenland, and actually I was going to go, but you can't get a plane ride in there. Apparently the planes only go twice a week, and they're all full.
Oh, no kidding. Yeah.
That's incredible. Talk a little, if you could, just for those of us who are outside the region, how are the indigenous communities doing in terms of economic prosperity, opportunity? You said that they're leaning forward and trying to create some economic opportunities for their communities, but what is life for them like, and how do they relate to the larger picture of the Arctic?
Yeah, I think it varies on the region. You know, and again, Alaska is huge, and we like to remind our friends in Texas that we're 2.5 times the size of Texas.
Can you imagine that? Think of that size, 2.5 times the size of Texas.
Yeah, you could cut us in half, and Texas would be the third largest state. So some areas of the state, the indigenous people just want to live on subsistence, and that's it. And that's great. Whether it be the fishing or the moose and caribou, and in other parts of the state, the indigenous people, they want to be a little more modern, and they want to get these jobs that the tech offers, and that the North Slope pays good salaries for, and so they are probably doing better, depending on how you define better, I guess, because sometimes I think the subsistence lifestyle is much simpler and much more relaxing and peaceful than
and I know among Canadian First Nations, one of the buzzwords of our time is equity. Wanting to be involved in projects, not just giving an approval and hoping it works out, but having a stake, being a co-owner of infrastructure crossing their community or whatnot. Has that also inspired some of the indigenous communities in Alaska to look for a new way of participating in some of these projects? Yeah.
Again, through their native corporations, they are participating in most of the development in our state, and then of course, then those corporations share the profits with their people, with their shareholders through the dividends and the profit that they get.
Well, and that's the way to go. You've got to have self-governance, self-determination, and we talked about the Red Dog Mine, and that's a good example of an Alaska Native corporation that saw a business opportunity, and that benefits everyone. They are participating, they own it, they have the resources of the big multinational, but they're really in charge in Alaska, and it has turned into a really good partnership. That's the one I'm familiar with, Chris. But there are other examples. It can always get better, but I think Alaska is figuring it out better than most.
Yeah, well, and a lot of that credit goes to our former Senator Ted Stevens. He put that all together back in the early 1970s and worked with the various tribal and native groups to come to agreement on land exchange, and it's worked out pretty well for us. And Kotzebue is a good example where the Red Dog Mine is. It used to be a very poor area, and now they got a new hospital. They got community college, and they got roads, so they're doing much better.
You mentioned Senator Stevens. I can't let you go without talking about politics for a little bit. We're here with a bunch of elected officials, including yourself.
Sure.
And a number of the Alaska delegation to Penwar isn't here. I think because there is a primary coming up.
Yeah.
We're in July here, and it's in August. Congressman passed away, an iconic congressman. So there's a race for that. So maybe give us a little. You're not running again, so this is safe. Give us a little update on politics in Alaska.
Yeah, no, happy to, because it is very complicated. Yeah, Don Young had been our representative forever, 49 years, and I think he wanted to get to 50, and so that's why he was running again. But unfortunately, he was 89, and he died on an airplane coming back from Alaska via L.A. And
tragic, really.
It's terrible. It's sad. Yeah. In Alaska, the lieutenant governor also serves as the Secretary of State, so I oversee elections. So we're having a special election to replace him, and it's probably not the best time to be doing a new way to hold our elections. But we're doing what's called ranked choice voting, and
that's happening here in Alberta too. Actually, they're doing ranked choice voting for the leader of the
United Conservative
Party. So you get.
I didn't know that. Yeah. I talked to some folks in Australia because they've been using it for quite a while. But it's very confusing to folks. It's their first time.
Yeah.
And they call me as the Secretary of State and say, well, how dare you? Why are you doing this? And the reason why we're doing it is because it passed by a ballot initiative.
The voters asked for it.
Yeah, I know. So it's like, anyway, it's not our idea. We don't.
Yeah, you just got to make it happen. Well, so what's going to happen? Any predictions? A lot of people are running. Some famous names, some not as well known. What do you think?
Yeah, well, again, I think everybody's trying to figure out how this ranked choice voting is going to work. For example, Sarah Palin's got name recognition, so we had. Here's where it gets complicated. Right now, we just need to fill Don Young's seat till the end of December. So we're having a special election just to fill that. But of course, everybody wants to win that. So then they are.
Then you're the incumbent, right?
And then the money flows to you, and then hopefully you win in the general in November. I think somebody like Sarah Palin, who is running for that seat, has the name recognition, but I don't think she can get 50%. So it's going to depend on how the votes get redistributed. Whoever's in fourth place, they get eliminated because they're last, and then their votes get reallocated. So it'll be interesting to see, and everybody's trying to out-strategize and outthink the system. I saw somebody say, well, if you can't vote for me or make me number one pick, make me your second pick. So.
Yeah, the campaigns. Well, maybe Chris, we could invite now the Secretary of State, Lieutenant Governor, back on Canusa Street after and explain to us what all happened.
Yeah, back in December. I'm hoping I'll be in Mexico or Hawaii.
We'll meet you there. We can take Canusa Street on the road, right, Chris?
Absolutely.
It's kind of sad, and I'm a good Republican, but we're still dealing with the 2020 election.
Yeah.
And there's some folks. The one that comes to mind sells pillows. That still saying that and the former president are still saying that the elections were fraud and you can't trust them, and that really bothers me because some people actually believe that, and so they contact me. But also what concerns me more is that people just won't vote. They'll think, hey, well, if the election's fraud and you can't trust it, why should I bother? So that concerns me.
That concerns me too for democracy.
Yeah.
Really.
Absolutely. One of the things that comes up again and again now is people's confidence in the system, their trust that it works. And every politician I've met, will speak usually to the value of trust and just the person to person. COVID's meant we've done a lot more remote communication. It isn't the same. You can have a call, obviously. We've done that for a long time, but it's not the same as seeing somebody face to face, looking them in the eye, having that conversation.
Shaking their hand. Yeah.
Shaking their hand. How do we come out of COVID with a politics that gets back to that personal dimension? And I know with the big spaces in Alaska, and you were talking about the lack of roads, it's always tempting to have a Zoom call, and that can be great for testimony from somebody from a small community if the broadband is there, because they can participate. Otherwise, they wouldn't, right? But for the business of politics, how do we get back to the interpersonal?
Yeah, that's a good question. Alaska never, right or wrong, I guess, never did really shut down during COVID. So we continued to stay open. Encouraged wearing masks and getting vaccinated and all that.
Sure.
I remember when I ran statewide for the lieutenant governor with the governor. You just have to hop on these small planes and go to all the villages and all over the state and try to do exactly what you're saying. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what I know that's what the candidates are doing now as well. So I think. We're still doing that personal one-on-one, and that is important, and that's actually critical, I believe, in order to win.
I also think it's critical to building the kind of odd couple partnerships that you sometimes see between people from different parties or different regions. And since we're in Washington, D.C., Scotty and I, we're always looking at Congress, and you realize that people are trying to spend as much time in the home district as possible. They sometimes don't even have anything but like a couch to sleep on in their office, and they're just not building the relationships they used to. And I think, just my opinion, I think it enables some of the nastiness.
Of the relationships with their colleagues.
With their colleagues, yeah.
Because I was going to say, they are flying back. It's a long flight.
It is.
To Alaska.
Yeah.
So I feel sorry for Don Young, who we just talked about, and Murkowski and Sullivan. There's got to be a balance there somewhere where you keep that one-on-one personal relationship with your constituents, but also you have a cordial relationship with your colleagues.
And this is something that I think we could learn more from Alaska, because you are a small state population-wise and quite low population density, but you're a big state geographically. And the U.S., we're a big country in both respects, but ultimately, overcoming distance, continuing that human interface, that's something you've been doing ever since you became a state and even before.
Yeah, and I think, Senator Murkowski has gotten maybe bad rap sometimes because she does cross over and work with the other party. And Ted Stevens, our senator I talked about earlier, did the same thing.
Well, and Senator Murkowski's father.
Yeah, Frank Murkowski.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I don't understand, why we have such bickering going on in D.C. and why, if you're a Republican, you have to vote this way, Democrat that way, because at least in state government, we had the flexibility and freedom to vote however we wanted to on a bill based on its merits.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's something maybe we can import a little bit from Alaska, bring down to Washington. There's always hope.
Yeah. What was that called? They got rid of it because people were getting all these capital projects.
Not the filibuster. Filibuster?
No. But somebody said if we brought that back, that would help. Bring both sides together more.
Oh, was it earmarks?
Earmarks, yes. Yeah. Yes, that's it.
Yeah. It's funny. I mean, I
don't know if you agree with that or not.
No, I mean, you have to find a way to get a consensus. And there's so many great stories in American, but also Canadian history where, somebody was a little skeptical about a big legislative proposal, but they got a post office. Or they were able to do something for their community, and they said, "Look, we have to compromise. That's the nature of politics." And while I'm not sure this whether it's healthcare reform or the interstate highway system is going to work or benefit my folks, I got something. so I can hold my head high and say, well, I hope it works, but the main thing was I got something for my district. And they took that away because they thought, well, it's creating all these crazy little projects and pet projects.
Yeah.
That's not the way to build a country, but it is the way to build consensus sometimes, to build the kind of majority that can get stuff passed.
Yep.
Well, now we're talking about politics, and I'm supposed to be just entertaining our listeners here. But let me end our part just with one question. You've seen politics in the rest of the country in Alaska, and we started talking about the Arctic. For those of us who live in the lower 48 who don't have that immediate connection.
Hopefully you don't live in Texas.
No.
Okay.
No, I'm from Detroit and I live in Washington now. But,
okay.
But for those of us who don't live in the Arctic, don't live so close to it, what would you tell us about climate change, about the future of this region, about the minerals, about it?
Yeah.
What do we need to know?
Well, the Arctic is definitely changing. And as I mentioned earlier, it's always been changing, but it's changing very rapidly now. And there's a lot of challenges to overcome, with the permafrost and some of the villages, falling into the ocean, and the increase in forest fires because we have, so many trees. So there are a lot of challenges that we need to address, and we look forward to dealing with them head on. But then there's also a lot of opportunities that we want to exploit. Now you have tourism, like I mentioned, the cruise ships are coming further north. But the tourism season, most everybody wants to come in the summer.
Yeah, funny.
is being extended. So tourism is longer. The fish seem to be migrating further north, but that's bringing opportunity for those folks in northern Alaska. So the changing Arctic is both a negative and a positive, and we need to address the negative and like I said, take advantage of the positive. And I think if we can all just work together as an Arctic region, which we have been doing until recently, we can all benefit.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks so much for spending time with us, Governor. It is great to see you in Calgary, and hopefully we'll see you in Alaska, and maybe once you retire, we'll see you in Hawaii or Mexico City or wherever you end up, and we'll bring Canusa Street to you. How about that?
Yeah, that sounds great, and
thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate this.
I love a good chat with a lieutenant governor. And Kevin Meyer, the lieutenant governor of the state of Alaska, is a really interesting guest for Canusa Street. He's an important leader. I think everybody in Alaska knows each other. And the fact that he's also Secretary of State is a new fact for me. So I was really interested to hear not only about Alaska issues, Arctic issues, but also election issues, democracy. That was a bonus in that conversation.
And for our Canadian listeners, we say lieutenant governor, not lieutenant governor. And this is not a...
Where is the F in lieutenant?
It's a British thing.
Could someone explain it? Yeah. I don't know.
Anyway, this is not an appointee or representative of the Crown. This is someone who is a politician who has real duties in making sure Alaska elections work. But more importantly, he's one of those Americans who lives and breathes in the Arctic. And I think for Americans, we often don't think of ourselves as an Arctic nation. You have to check in with Alaska to really understand how important it is for the United States.
That's exactly right. And you know what? I would also recommend to anybody who hasn't been to the Arctic, go. Canadian American Business Council has led a few business delegations up there. I've had the opportunity to travel to the Arctic, the subarctic. You've been up there. I think it's a wonderful opportunity, and we should go. It's the place is changing dramatically, and the issues from sovereignty to climate change to environmental catastrophe to war with Russia, they're all there. It's really fascinating.
It really is. But I think one of the things that came out from that interview and will stay with me is we have to listen to people who live there. Discussion about, well, is climate change affecting things? Well, they know. And we should be listening to them and supporting them. They're our fellow Americans and in some cases fellow Canadians. So very important to listen to someone like Lieutenant Governor Meyer. And I thought he was very charming.
He was charming, and I love this idea of getting together in person at a conference. It's a target-rich environment for us,
it is.
And our producer Zavi spends a lot of time chasing down our guests and our schedules and everything else. And in this case, here at Penmore in Calgary, we're able to talk to a lot of people in a short period of time, and that's a real blessing, actually.
Yes, and Zavi can actually physically drag them in here, so he's the muscle of Canusa Street now.
He's the muscle of Canusa Canusa Street. That's exactly right. Picture I don't know, an Emmett. What?
It's like a reverse bouncer. Instead of throwing people out, he throws them in, and then
He's the magnet and the muscle.
Yes.
There we go. And amen. Listen, always great to see you, my friend.
Always great to see you too.
Outstanding.
This podcast is brought to you by the Canadian American Business Council and the Wilson Center. If you like this episode, help others find our show and give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.